Okay, it is 5 p.m. on the dot. Let's get started. So, hello everyone. Welcome to our Opportunity Housing Explained panel. My name is Nick Preciato. I'm editor with San Jose Spotlight. We've got several panelists here. So here's how things are going to go. I'm going to give a quick introduction on what Opportunity Housing is. I'm going to introduce the panelists. Each panelist is going to give a presentation, about 5 minutes. And from there, we'll go to a Q&A portion with our panelists for about 45 minutes. And then once we finish there, we'll round out the evening with a audience question and answer portion as well, with a short outro. And for you attendees out there, please note you are welcome to type in the chat or in the QA box if you have any questions of our panelists, and we can get to those at the end of the forum. Panelists, are you ready to get started? Okay. So let me just do a quick introduction first, and thank you also as well for our sponsor for today's forum, the Housing Authority of Santa Clara County. So for those of you who aren't clear on what Opportunity Housing is, let me just give you a little background on that. So Opportunity Housing is an initiative to increase the number of homes that can be built in single-family neighborhoods. The initiative stems from a series of San Jose General Plan Review meetings held in 2020, and if this is approved by the City Council in the future, Opportunity Housing would allow for the building of up to 4 homes on a single parcel in neighborhoods limited to single family housing. There's existing state legislation right now for accessory dwelling units. That's layman terms, it's like granny units or backyard units. Existing state legislation for accessory dwelling units combined with the Opportunity Housing Initiative could mean up to 7 units on a single property if the lot is large enough to accommodate that number of units. Currently, about 94% of the city's residential land is limited to single-family structures, while only 6% of residential land in San Jose is zoned for multifamily homes. Supporters of Opportunity Housing say it will increase the city's housing supply, as well as alleviate rising rents. Meanwhile, opponents say it will exacerbate existing problems with parking and traffic. The city has started analyzing the cost effectiveness of this proposal and will proceed to study it further if the City Council gives them the go-ahead this summer. So now let's introduce our panelists. First up, we have Rosalind Huey. Rosalind has over 30 years of urban planning and development experience and serves as deputy city manager for the city of San Jose, where she provides leadership and community and economic development and strategic coordination for city departments shaping the future of San Jose. She joined the city of San Jose in 2014 as assistant director for the Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement, and was appointed director in 2018. Prior to joining the city of San Jose, Rosalind served as deputy director in the Washington, D.C. Office of Planning. Rosalind, thank you for joining us today. Next up, we have Kiyomi Honda Yamamoto. Kiyomi is a 4th-generation San Josean and lead housing policy attorney at the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. Her public service career includes roles at Greenbelt Alliance, SPUR, the San Jose Redevelopment Agency, and as well as a board member for the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. As a Japanese American, her family's history of addressing prejudice and economic challenges inspires her commitment to supporting efforts that amplify community power for effective and lasting progress. Good to have you with us, Kiyomi. Next up, we've got Roberta Moore. Roberta became a real estate agent and bought her first fourplex more than 40 years ago. She stays informed on legislation that impacts real estate and is currently active in 9 organizations to increase home ownership and improve the quality of life in San Jose. Welcome, Roberta. And last but not least, we've got Matt Hurdle. Matt is the AICP, the acting long-range, acting long-range planning manager with the city of Sacramento. The long-range planning team is working on a number of critical planning efforts, including the 2040 General Plan and Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, the 2021 to 2029 Housing Element, and the Stockton Boulevard Plan. Matt has a master's degree in community development and planning from Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Welcome, Matt. Okay, we're going to get started with our panelist presentations now. Rosalind, you're going first, so whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. Again, Rosalind Huey, thank you for the invitation to be with you this afternoon. Really looking forward to our dialogue around opportunity housing. Great, thank you. So I wanted to provide just a little bit of context here in the city of San Jose in terms of where we are regarding housing. And so we all know that we are in the midst of a housing crisis, not just the city of San Jose, but the entire Bay region, the state of California, and obviously beyond. So many cities are grappling with housing in cities across the US. So back in September of 2017, Mayor Sam Liccardo wrote a memoranda around our housing crisis and wanting the city to develop a plan of action to address the housing crisis. And the plan called for the production of 25,000 new homes by 2023, 10,000 of those to be affordable. The city council actually established a work plan around the housing crisis back in June 2018. And at that time, the administration also developed a housing catalyst team. And this team consists of a housing catalyst who resides in the Office of Economic Development. We have the deputy director in our housing department, and also our planning deputy director also rounding out that housing catalyst team. So they meet every 2 weeks. The work plan involves dozens of strategies and actions around affordable housing. And some of those plan highlights includes inclusionary housing ordinance, with the city council just approved some updates to that housing a short while ago. Last year, the city council approved a commercial linkage fee. We have an effort around accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, or granny flats. The housing department is currently working on affordable housing siting policy. And the city is also looking at allowing residential uses in areas that are known as public, quasi-public lands. So these are generally lands that house public uses, such as school districts and places of worship. So we have a variety of strategies and actions around affordable housing. So next slide. So introducing opportunity housing, and why the city council sees this as potentially another strategy to address our housing crisis. If you take a look at this map, this is a map obviously of our city. All of the light yellow areas represents areas that are designated for single family homes. And I do want to make a point that these are areas not necessarily zoned, but are designated in the city's general plan for single family residential units. As we compare ourselves to national statistics, you can see here in this slide, nationally, on average, about 75% of residential land in big cities across the US is designated or zoned for single family. And here in the city of San Jose, we know that housing is very expensive. Our median home price now is well over $1.2 million, which is expensive. And so we are asking ourselves, we have been asking this for several years now, where are our families going to live? Where are city employees going to live? Teachers, healthcare professionals, where are people going to be able to afford to live in the city? So again, we're looking at a variety of tools and strategies. Next slide. So Nick covered this a little bit in his intro in terms of what is opportunity housing. And I like to talk about it as a way of offering additional housing choices for our residents. And it is in a scale and a form that resembles single family homes. So that's why you'll see, and I'll show you in some examples in the upcoming slides, photos of duplexes or triplexes or more with more units that have the appearance or the form of a single family house, but actually provides more units. These units are affordable by design because they're smaller in nature. And this is also referred to as what people have coined missing middle housing. And that's usually the term that is used in large cities across the US. And why it's referred to as missing middle is that, decades ago, cities used to build this type of housing stock, duplexes, triplexes in cities. Post-World War II is when cities, big cities mostly, started producing a lot of single-family homes. And actually, in the city of San Jose, it wasn't until about 2014 that the production of housing began to be more of what we call mid-rise or high-rise. So we call it missing middle is because we have this housing stock that's just not really available to moderate income residents here in our city. And so efforts in other cities across the country have been well underway. We know the city of Minneapolis was the first large city in the US to actually allow additional units in single family zones. Portland, Seattle, actually the entire state of Oregon has been enabled this. And we know that other cities, including Sacramento, we're here from today, Berkeley and South San Francisco are also considering. Next slide. So why is the city of San Jose having this conversation about opportunity housing? And so back in 2019, the city council actually provided direction to city staff and the general plan 4-year review task force to take a look at opportunity housing as part of its scope of work. And so this language in the slide is the exact direction that we got from our city council was to look at allowing 2 to 4 units with a lot of parameters. And they included limiting to areas that were close to transit-oriented urban villages, making sure that we devise a set of design guidelines, allow flexibility, clarifying that redevelopment obviously remains up to the discretion of the property owner. This is not a mandate. It's something that property owners would have the option of participating in. We wanted to be sensitive to historic neighborhoods and also do a cost-effective analysis. Next slide. So the staff and the task force looked at these parameters. So again, looked at up to 4 units per parcel, which could include duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. As Nick did mention in his intro, the state also allows additional ADUs on a single family lot. Obviously, these additional units, right, they have to have certain zoning setbacks and heights, and all of that would be developed should we get council direction to move forward with this policy. Those design standards and development standards would be established. Next slide. And so here are some examples that currently here in our city of opportunity housing types. So again, these are most likely duplexes, maybe some triplexes in these images. Again, it's all about the appearance of a single family home. Next slide. And here are other examples. The bottom 2 examples are definitely located in the city of San Jose, probably in neighborhoods that are closer to our downtown core. And then the images at the top are renderings. Actually, one is an existing housing type. Next slide. So what is being recommended? So during the general plan 4-year review task force, city staff did make a recommendation to the task force in alignment with the city council direction. And that was to allow opportunity housing near transit-oriented urban villages. However, during the task force deliberation, and their consideration, at the end of the day, the task force vote was to actually allow opportunity housing citywide in our areas that are designated as residential neighborhood. Next slide. So next steps. We are working on bringing all of the general plan 4-year reviews task force recommendations to the City Council this fall. We received further direction this spring out of the mayor's March budget message to actually separate out the opportunity housing recommendation to be considered separately. So we are on track to bring that to City Council in October of this year. We'll bring all of the other task force recommendations a month earlier in September. And so what happens if the City Council does take action to pursue developing this opportunity housing policy? A lot of work has to still happen, even if we do get that council direction in October of this year. Obviously, first and foremost, a lot of community engagement. And so, during the task force process, we were not scoped to do significant community engagement. Obviously, it would have been a little bit premature because we haven't gotten council direction yet. So should we get this council direction, we would devise a strategy and a plan to engage our residents throughout the city. We would have to conduct a displacement risk analysis. During the task force discussion, displacement was an important issue that was discussed. I talked a little bit earlier about the importance of developing design standards for opportunity housing. And this is regarding development standards in terms of design, setbacks, heights. And then ultimately, we would have to prepare an environmental analysis, identifying any impacts associated with the policy. And I think that's my last slide, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind. And just a quick reminder, if anybody has any questions or just wants to put something in the chat, those are available for the audience to use. Up next, we're going to have Kiyomi give her presentation next. And I see we're still kind of setting up the presentation, but once that's set up, Kiyomi, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. If we go to the next slide, I'm here representing San Jose Neighborhoods for All. Are you able to migrate to the next? Thank you. And we are a coalition that supports the study of citywide opportunity housing for 3 big reasons. One is addressing the housing crisis, the second is to build equity and growing community wealth, and the third is environmental sustainability. And citywide opportunity housing is really about gentle density and a market-driven process, but we also want incentives to create formally affordable homes and strong anti-displacement measures to ensure that new homes are for our people. If we go to the next slide, I just want to mention that the problem isn't about single-family homes, it's about single-family zoning, which makes it illegal for a community to build anything other than a single home on a single lot. Single-family zoning was invented by a Berkeley real estate developer who was driven to exclude Black people from buying or renting homes. And citywide opportunity housing would legalize multiplex housing in areas that are exclusively reserved for only single-family homes. The next slide is San Jose's redlining map, and single-family zoning coupled with redlining led to today's huge wealth gap. 87% of today's displacement areas in San Jose align with historically redlined neighborhoods that were rated as hazardous or definitely declining, largely based upon resident skin color and immigration status, which hindered their ability to obtain home loans. And redlining commonly continued through 1976, was accompanied by racially restricted covenants that were seen in Rose Garden, Everly Park, and Willow Glen, just for examples. Let's go to the next slide. This is the original council directions conceptual map. And so looking at this, we're asking ourselves, are we just creating a new form of redlining, a new form of exclusion? And we believe that citywide opportunity housing removes these divisive walls. If we go to the next slide, the city touched on this already. And I understand that some people have different numbers, but really I think the idea is we have to make room for 68,000 new homes. And even if the number is not 96, if it's 84, 74, 64, how are you going to fit 68,000 new quality homes into the remaining amount of land? And that land is not vacant, right? That land is utilized, and it's just not realistic. If you go to the next slide, this is just a photo of me with my friends before we were going to embark on our college adventure. And we are the missing middle. And missing middle, people who don't qualify for subsidized housing, but don't quite have the income to purchase a single family home. And out of this group, with secondary degrees and all employed, I'm the only one able to afford to return home. The next slide shows the relationship between different professions, median rent and their ability to purchase a rent. You can see a huge gap between the income you need to rent a home and to purchase a single family home. Prices have gone up for homes have gone up 200% in the last 10 years. And the Spotlight article actually stated that a buyer of a median priced home in San Jose must earn $243,000 a year, but a typical family in San Jose only earns about half that amount. We believe that opportunity housing, because they are potentially both for rent and for sale, can help close that home ownership gap. The next slide just shows that as families are being priced out, our public school enrollment is declining, which you can see on that chart. If we skip to the next slide, Rosalind touched on this, that opportunity housing, multiplex housing is already in San Jose. It's integrated into our communities. And it's really when we started sprawling out that we stopped creating communities that integrated different housing types. The next few slides for Spotlight, if you just scroll through, they're just examples of multiplex housing in San Jose. Yeah, there we go. Okay, great. So citywide opportunity housing, we believe, promotes the Fair Housing Act. And when Dr. King led marches to bring attention to the housing crisis, he was met with residents holding signs stating, "We worked hard for what we got." And immediately after Dr. King's murder, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which included the Fair Housing Act. And the Fair Housing Act means to provide equal opportunity in housing, create integrated communities, and eliminate historical patterns of segregation. The next slide shows California's affirmatively furthering Fair Housing Act. So like all cities in our state, San Jose has an affirmative duty to promote fair housing. California's Department of Housing and Community Development released guidelines that should help make it clear on how we should handle citywide opportunity housing. And some highlights are that we must build affordable homes in high resource areas and look at land use reforms targeted geographically to promote more inclusive communities. Building a mix of housing types in all parts of the city, like duplexes or fourplexes at a variety of need levels, and reconsider restrictive historic preservation districts. And also that people with lower incomes need to have realistic access to affordable and well-maintained homes in all parts of a jurisdiction, not just within a half-mile of transit. So this is really not about an overall score. It's to individually address access to education and economic prosperity. In the last couple slides, I just wanted to highlight, if we can, great. So opportunity housing can be a smart infill growth strategy that's best for affordability, environment, and transportation. When people can no longer find or afford homes near where they work, they are often displaced to the edges of our community, putting sprawl pressure on our open space lands. And this increases commutes and adds to our greenhouse gas emissions. Approximately 20% of workers in Santa Clara County commute in from outside of the Bay Area. And the next slide, great, okay. So citywide opportunity housing also supports VTA ridership. VTA includes bikeability for determining access to transit connections. So transit goes up, the need for cars and parking go down, and policies can be adjusted to ensure that parking policies are right sized for our area. And the last two slides are just me wrapping up. I just want to recognize the many perspectives and questions about opportunity housing. What I hope we can agree to is that before we make important policy decisions like this, it's really key to gather the factual and database information, including how policies interact with each other and how they will impact our daily lives. So our questions to you is, will you join us in asking the city to help us get some answers? Can we explore the potential of opportunity housing as a community serving tool? Because I think we can use this to guide our neighborhoods into a continued successful and prosperous future. And the very last slide is just how you can get in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiyomi. While the slides are changing over, I just want to welcome the people who just joined us. Welcome to Opportunity Housing Explained, put on by San Jose Spotlight. For those of you just joining us, we have the chat available for you to use, as well as a Q&A portion that we'll be doing at the end of this panel. So up next, we have Roberta. And I know that we're setting up your presentation right now, but Roberta, once that is up on the screen, you can feel free to start whenever you're ready. Sorry, Roberta, it looks like we're still just waiting for your slides to come up. There we go. Okay, Roberta, whenever you're ready.
Next slide. That might be the wrong presentation, just that's the overview, yeah. Okay, great, got it. So thank you very much for the invitation to present here. And Nick, I appreciate you giving an overview of what opportunity housing is. After much research and many perspectives, my conclusion about this policy is it will have the opposite effect of the promises made. Next slide. Next slide. The purpose of zoning is to create different areas. Back a slide. Please, yeah, thanks. The purpose of zoning is to create different areas for people to live, shop, and work. Today, you have a choice if you want to live in the city, suburbs, or country. If single-family zoning is eliminated, you will no longer have this choice. San Jose is already a medium-density city. Less than 53% of the homes are single-family detached. So the census data, the chart on the left is based on the census data, and then it's confirmed by the city's data on the right. If you look, you can see it's the beige is, I think, 1 to 5, low, medium density. Next slide, please. This is the largest land use proposal that would affect most of us without our input. So what this shows is if they change or eliminate single family zoning, it will all be multifamily except for the less than 1% that are the historic neighborhoods that are protected and the very expensive neighborhoods where it just won't pencil out to build opportunity housing. So this leaves less than 1%. Most of San Jose will become multifamily. So my question is, given that there's better solutions that have been proposed, why is the city so eager to eliminate the planning process and our ability to have choice? And if you don't believe this data, let's look at the next slide, which is Ballard. So Ballard adopted similar policies of infill and redevelopment 10 years ago. My in-laws happen to live in Ballard, and they sold last year because the neighborhood became unlivable. Rents increased 50%, housing prices skyrocketed, homelessness increased. And what I want to say is choice is really important, and I want you to listen carefully. My in-laws said Ballard was great when they were single, but not a place to have kids. If you think eliminating single-family zoning is a good idea and won't impact homes by all but the wealthiest, I encourage you to watch this 7-minute video and ask yourself, what do you want San Jose to be like in 10 years? Next slide. Next slide, thanks. Eliminating single-family zoning is bad for the environment. Those units built away from major transit will increase congestion, greenhouse gases, and parking problems. And the way it was proposed to us when I was on the General Plan Task Force was to consider whether it should be within a 1/4 mile or a 1/2 mile of major transit lines. Next slide. At 13%, San Jose already has the lowest tree canopy cover of every major city in California. The Sierra Club is against this policy because of the guaranteed reduction in canopy. Ballard lost more than half of their tree canopy, and you can watch the video. 70% of San Jose canopy is in single family housing. What are we going to lose if this policy passes? Will we become just like LA except have even less canopy? Next slide, please. Here's a key point I want to make. Home ownership creates generational wealth. NAR provides a comparison of wealth between renters and homeowners. Nationally, homeowners' net worth is 37 times greater than renters. Eureka explained redlining. This was when the government created the wealth divide for people of color in the 30s by blocking their participation in home ownership. Let's be clear, the government created this and they blocked participation in home ownership. Eliminating single-family zoning will further this divide, guaranteed. And here's how. Next slide. Oh no, back, stay, go back. Thanks. Dezoning will increase opportunities. Dezoning will increase opportunities for investors and government-funded nonprofits to build below market rate rentals. This will block first-time home buyers from participating in home ownership. After all, they can't own an ADU or part of a fourplex, and they won't be able to compete with the investors or the nonprofits, especially after the city passes COPA, which they're already doing in the Dearborn area. Policies that create more rental stock at the expense of home ownership destroy generational wealth for future generations. My question is, why is the government so focused on rentals if they want economic equity? Next slide. While the General Plan Task Force recommended it be citywide, there were concerns mentioned by 52 people who spoke about it that night, spoke against opportunity housing citywide that night. 70% said this policy would have a negative impact on services, neighborhood, environment, and infrastructure. Next slide. 45% said it lacked city planning and would take too many resources, city resources to implement. Next slide. 20% said it won't increase affordable housing. And I think Ballard, if you watch the Ballard video, you'll see it actually decreased affordable housing. So my question is, why does the city want to bypass planning and neighborhood input? And what really makes this okay? Next slide. Eliminating single-family zoning is like a Band-Aid solution for much bigger issues. I'm against it because, like with Ballard, it nullifies planning and neighbor input, takes away choice, is not good for the environment, and will, most importantly, will decrease generational wealth for future generations. Next slide. I like to stay positive and have positive recommendations. First, and I like the recommendations to benefit as many people as possible. First, we need to get voter approval. This is way too big and affects too many people for a vote by 6 council members. Second, if you want to create true generational wealth for all, support buying homes instead of building rentals. With a 3% down payment and FHA loan, rents are close to the monthly cost of ownership. Ask the city, no, demand the city develop programs for first-time home ownership. Don't settle for rentals. And I just want to say quickly, in the 8 years Mayor Gonzalez was in office, he got 10,000 units built for purchase by moderate income people like teachers and police officers and fire workers. In the past 6 years, if you look at the city audit, the city is built less than 1,000 units, and mostly they're for rent, not for ownership. Next slide. Dezoning is the solution. It's like the doctor saying, look at the birdie over here, to distract you from the shot they're about to give you. There's another really much bigger problem. Opportunity housing is not opportunity. It will not get the needed units. And in 2019, we were at half of the unit building goal. These policies, while ideologically sound, are blocking development. And the 2 specific ones that developers have mentioned are inclusionary housing fee, $175,000 per unit, and commercial requirements. So the city needs to start allowing planned development by at least temporarily eliminating the policies that block it. Next slide. Be informed before you decide. I do a lot of research before I reach conclusions. I get feedback from a lot of different people, and I get a lot of different perspectives. So the first one is, if you don't believe the conclusions I've made, please watch the YouTube video about Ballard 10 years later, and I hope they'll let me put it in the chat. The second one is, Seattle created similar policies, and within a year, there's pictures of what it looked like. And I included pictures from Ballard and Seattle in my presentation, so you can get an idea. It's not pleasant. It does not look good. Developers can essentially build whatever they want, and this is going to be an investor-developer play. And finally, if you want information, contact Families and Homes San Jose. They're volunteers who live in San Jose. And I want to point out something that I've discovered that's very disappointing. The nonprofits that are speaking on behalf of this are city funded with paid staff, and they're funded by the city to implement and support these policies. So it's not a clean playing ground, and it's not a level playing ground. And I hope you will at least get informed before you make final decisions about this. Thank you. And if you have questions, I look forward to getting them.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. We're going to move on to the next presenter now, Matt, who works with the city of Sacramento. Looks like we're just getting your slides up there. Roberta, feel free, if you want to put those links that you were talking about, if you want to put those in the chat, go right ahead. And just for our audience there at home, I believe we're also going to be sharing this video tomorrow or sometime later this week. So if you want to view the presentations, you'll be able to do that again when we put the video out.
So do I put it in the panelist chat?
If you put it in the chat, you should make sure that it doesn't go to panelists. You want it to go to, I believe there's an option that says panelists and attendees.
Got it.
All right, well, thank you. I'm Matt Hurdle of the City of Sacramento's Planning Division. Appreciate the invitation tonight from San Jose Spotlight. Nice to be here. So I'm going to provide an overview of some of the housing and land use related policy changes we are working on here in Sacramento. So Sacramento is conducting 3 major planning efforts. Like San Jose, we're in the midst of updating our general plan, our 2040 general plan, also our climate action plan, and our housing element, or 8-year housing strategy. And through more than 2 years of citywide outreach to date, 3 priorities have risen to the top. That's the availability and affordability of housing, climate action, and equity. And these planning initiatives are anticipated to result in significant policy shifts in the areas of land use and housing to address these priorities. As requested, I'll be focusing primarily on the key strategy of permitting a greater array of housing types in single unit neighborhoods. So we are approximately, next slide, the second slide there, great. We are approximately 2 years into the 3-year planning process for Sacramento 2040. And in January, our city council directed staff to proceed with the draft land use map and other key strategies for the purposes of preparing the draft 2040 general plan. So we are now in phase 3, where our planning team is drafting the key policy documents and beginning the environmental review process. These documents are anticipated to be ready for public review in September this year. Next slide. All right. So to help us set the context, the city of Sacramento has about half of the residents of San Jose, with a population of around 513,000. But like many cities, we are experiencing substantial growth. And by 2040, our city is projected to grow by 69,000 new housing units and 77,000 new jobs. Next slide, please. As I'm sure you can relate, the city of Sacramento needs more and lower cost housing. 2020 was our largest number of new housing units in 15 years. However, even in this banner year, we were still 2,000 units short to meet the actual need. Next slide. As part of our current updates to our general plan and housing element or housing strategy, we've identified many policies and 50 housing implementation programs under 8 overarching goals as shown here. Next slide. Under the goal of advancing equity and inclusion, we are essentially writing a mini Sacramento version of The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. I recommend checking out that book. We are coming to grips with our own land use history of racial and socioeconomic segregation. Throughout the country, including here in Sacramento, redlining maps were used by financial institutions to assess the level of risk for making home loans. Red areas, as shown in the map on the left, were described as racial hazards, where infiltration of subversive races has occurred. Yellow areas were seen to be declining for having multifamily housing and existing minority populations. In this way, minority groups were not granted government-backed home loans with favorable terms in their own neighborhoods, but were also prohibited from moving to many of the best and still desirable green and blue neighborhoods through racial restrictive covenants. Well, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed racially restrictive covenants and government-sponsored redlining. The effects of past systemic segregation and exclusion in housing are still apparent in many areas of Sacramento today. Next slide. As shown in yellow on this zoning district map, 70% of Sacramento's neighborhoods are zoned for single family. This equates to about 50% of the city's 101 square miles of land area. Next slide. State housing element law requires jurisdictions to comply with AB 686 to affirmatively further fair housing. This means taking meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation, address disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity, and foster inclusive communities. Next slide. Sacramento continues to experience a housing shortage, and duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are considered missing middle housing types and typically have lower rents than single unit homes. As noted earlier, many of the city's desirable neighborhoods are currently zoned for single unit homes, a more expensive housing type. Past discriminatory practices of racially restrictive covenants and redlining have created barriers to homeownership and intergenerational wealth building for many minority families. Subsequent single-family zoning in high-opportunity neighborhoods has reinforced this. The exclusion of lower-cost housing types prevents many residents from moving to neighborhoods with the best parks, schools, and other desirable amenities, allowing a greater array of housing types in Sacramento's residential neighborhoods will help create more equitable, inclusive neighborhoods. Next slide. There are over 2,300 duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes that exist in Sacramento today. Some of these examples are shown here, but as you can imagine, there's been a lot of community interest in this particular policy change that would once again permit these housing types in all city neighborhoods. This strong community interest is demonstrated by these two competing yard signs shown here. So even though City Council provided unanimous direction for staff to proceed with this key strategy in January, we are still about 1.5 years away from the effective date. This slide shows the two key milestones for this policy to take effect. The 2040 general plan is slated for adoption in about 11 months. And once the 2040 general plan is adopted, the city's planning and development code, commonly referred to the zoning code, would be updated in 2022 to ensure consistency with the general plan, and would change the definitions of our residential zones to allow these housing types. And we anticipate having the effective date of this change will be late summer 2022. That wraps up my overview. We've developed an FAQ for this key strategy, and I can drop that in the chat as well, so you can see a little bit about what we're doing in Sacramento. Looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Matt. Okay, everyone, we've had the appetizer. Let's move on to the main course. We're going to go into a panel discussion right now with our panelists. From there, we will move on to an audience question and answer portion. And just a reminder, we have a Q&A box. If you'd like to put a question in there, we will consider going over that when it's time for the Q&A at the end. So this Q&A with our panelists, it's going to alternate. It basically goes one question per panelist, and then we start over. So everybody has a chance to answer about 2, maybe 3 questions. I think everyone's going to get a chance to answer a third one, all the same question. So we're going to start with Rosalind first. Let me get the question up here. Okay. The question is, how does opportunity housing compare to other recent proposals to help alleviate San Jose's housing crisis? Do you feel it's a more feasible solution? Why or why not? And finally, does the housing department have a position on this proposal?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Nick. So as I mentioned in my previous, in the slide presentation, the city of San Jose, the council is considering a number of different strategies and actions to address our housing crisis. So I would say that the opportunity housing concept is one of those strategies being considered among a host of things. You know, when it comes to housing, we know we have to produce a lot more for our residents. We just recently received our RENA number, which is our Regional Housing Needs Allocation number from the state. And we have an increase of 90% over the last housing cycle. So our number went from 35,000 to over 66,000 units that we have to accommodate here in our city in order to reach the allocation that comes down from the state. So to that end, I would say that the city council, the administration, right, it's just important to examine and explore every possible strategy. So in addition to opportunity housing, our urban villages has long been a strategy in our general plan, and we are working to complete additional urban village plans so that we can facilitate more housing in those areas. The city's been working on unlocking North San Jose for additional housing development. That's a huge area that we could see significant housing built. Obviously, we continue to promote our ADU program. It's very interesting, just last calendar year, of all of the residential building permits issued, over half were for ADUs. So we're excited, right, that our residents and homeowners are interested in building those additional units on those lots. So I would say that because, we haven't finished our work on opportunity housing, we haven't even gotten council direction to move forward yet. But I would say that I'm sure the city council is considering every possible tool.
Okay, thank you. This next question is for Matt. Matt, and whenever you're ready, the question is, I understand Sacramento's recently adopted policy eliminating certain zoning requirements, allowing for more density, doesn't go into effect until 2022. What were some of the arguments you heard from both sides of the debate when this policy was being vetted?
Yeah, I think it's nice to be a part of the community conversation happening here in San Jose. I mean, I think cities are having this conversation all over the country. This is a housing type, and the way that we built cities previously was all over. I mean, you see them. I know San Jose has a number of these units, thousands of units already in their city. We did too. And there are certain reasons the city's made certain land use changes and zoning changes in the 60s primarily. And so we're having those conversations. We're having those conversations about why those decisions took place in the first place. And we're having those conversations about how we remain in our city where people can thrive of all incomes. We can keep our city diverse, keep our city affordable. We see, the intense pressures in adjacent cities. There's a lot of interest in coming to Sacramento because real estate is cheaper than the Bay Area, but that's putting additional pressure on our housing stock. So we need to find opportunities for lower cost rental and homeownership opportunities. This strategy would do both. But it is, important to note that, this is one of 50 policies and programs that we're looking at to increase housing affordability and availability in our city. But yeah, I think generally, so I have these conversations with community residents all the time. And I think folks, really love their neighborhoods and they love where they live. And so the question that I send back to residents are, tell me what you really love about it. What do you love about your neighborhood, about your street? What do you want to maintain going forward? And we're going to work on those things. I mean, a lot of it is really about the scale and the standards that are in place, right? The height, the setback, the lot coverage or open space requirements. Those kinds of things certainly will be a part of this strategy going forward. So we're looking forward to rolling our sleeves up. We have a year and a half to work out many of the details and questions that are being posed, and we look forward to that.
Okay, thanks, Matt. This next question is for Roberta. The question is, last August, as a member of the San Jose's General Plan Task Force, you voted against a motion to recommend that the City Council direct staff to study opportunity housing citywide. Why shouldn't San Jose enact opportunity housing citywide? And what are some of the pros and cons when you allow upzoning only near transit centers?
So I think I covered why not to pretty thoroughly. It's, if you go away from the transit areas, it's not good for the environment. What was your second question?
The second question was, what are some of the pros and cons when you allow upzoning only near transit centers?
Okay. The reason that people didn't want it just near transit areas was because they didn't think it was fair, as those are the areas where they're more affordable, less expensive housing. And so that was the main reason to go citywide. The reason people don't want citywide is because they want choice. They want to, they want the choice of living in the country or in the suburbs. They don't want to all have to live in high density housing. So, yeah, so that's the main reason that people said. But my whole presentation was about that, what people said and why they don't want it. And I guess the main point I want to make is I read The Color of Law very early on, and there's this whole push for equity. There's a real problem with lack of supply across the board, across the country. And there's a real valid push for equity. The problem is regulations like this do not solve the problem. They actually will make it worse. My background's in real estate, it's in rentals, it's in economics, and this will make it worse. That's what people have to understand. If they really dig down, the ideology is great. I agree with the ideology of it. So my grandparents were the minimum worker maid in a hotel and a gardener. I very much agree with the ideology, but the problem is it will fail, and guaranteed it will destroy San Jose's neighborhoods. And it will, I'll shut up, sorry. Took too long.
That's okay. Thank you, Roberta. Okay, the next question is for Kiyomi. The question is, currently 94% of San Jose is zoned for single family homes. How does that impact our city?
Right. So I want to clarify first that, citywide opportunity housing, it legalizes multiplex housing in single family neighborhoods. It doesn't eliminate single family homes. So as mentioned in my presentation, single family zoning is designed to keep Black residents and other people of color out, and it was effective. But as a single family homeowner myself, and knowing my neighbors, I know that public sentiment has changed, but it's undeniable that inequities still persist and that homeowners still benefit from them. Single family zoning is often thought of as a characteristic of a suburb, but when we look to our neighbor to the north in Mountain View, about 50% of their land is zoned for a single family home. So if we're at 94 or 84 or anything, around those numbers, we're still zoned too high. And that's why it's important that we're looking at opportunity housing citywide. And some of the general plan task force members shared that by only allowing opportunity housing within a half mile of a transit urban village, it's just another form of redlining. Areas like Allen Rock and Eastbridge are Latino and Southeast Asian communities that are already overcrowded. So by limiting, again, it would not make this policy as effective as it should be. I want to quickly walk you through three big reasons, again, why this single family versus multifamily ratio hurts our city. And the first is the housing crisis. We talked about the RENA. The math doesn't work out to be able to fit 68,000 new homes into a minority part of the land. Citywide opportunity housing, on the other hand, allows for gentle density throughout the city, which means we can meet that demand with having very little impact on our day-to-day lives. I also want to take a step back and say that I think we're treating this a little bit like a zero-sum game, and that's just not the case. There's not a loss that I see to myself by having a few people in my neighborhood creating a housing situation that invites more neighbors into my area. And I also believe that a lot of these discussions are placing more value on how we're impacting the lives of single-family homeowners rather than those who live in multifamily housing or who are at risk of facing displacement or already have been displaced. I think this tension is unnecessary, and I don't think that it helps be divisive. We're a much stronger community when we stand together than when we allow misinformation and fear-mongering to tear us apart. I also think it's really important to see what other plans and processes are going on in San Jose. So for example, San Jose's climate smart goals is that by 2030 to create an additional 22 million square feet of commercial workspace within a half mile of transit. So to me, we're starting to treat like a half mile of transit like my junk drawer at home, right? Like if I have a paper clip, I want to keep it, I don't know where to put it, so I throw it in that drawer and hope it closes. But one day that drawer is not going to close. So we have to be more open-minded to how we're handling growth. Second, quickly use equity. We talked about the AFFH guidelines and placing housing in high opportunity areas. And when we do that, we're determining how, we're assessing things like quality of education and other things like public resources. And we also have to give actual choice to residents. That means a variety of housing types, like multiplex housing throughout the city, not just a half-mile transit. So when your conceptual map starts to look a little bit like a constraining redlining map, to me, that indicates a problem. And lastly, we're talking about the environment, right? So some people are there for opportunity housing within a half-mile of transit because they think that's more environmentally friendly than citywide, but that's short-sighted. And we claim we're the capital of Silicon Valley. We're innovators. We create for the future. So why are the transit routes of today preventing us from planning for the future? I mean, can you imagine if we didn't make the Apple computer because we didn't have high-speed internet? Why are we selling ourselves short? The task force really was tasked to look at a bigger picture and see what's going to be here in 30, 40 years time. So again, last, actually, we know that resources have come up, right? How do our natural resources, power, water, how are those infrastructure going to be affected? But we know that when we build a little bit more densely, that those resources are actually used more efficiently. So by not employing a citywide opportunity housing because of today's transit system, it's irresponsible. And intentional or not, the result will be preventing adding homes that are available and affordable to more people and reducing the ridership needed to extend our transit. So citywide opportunity housing is an investment in people, and it's an investment in the transit needed for climate smart cities.
Okay, thank you. This next question is for Rosalind. The question is, how will opportunity housing affect our parking capacity, and what ideas do you have to address this?
Yeah, great question. Thanks so much, Nick. So we know the issue of parking is one that causes a lot of tension. We know that there are multiple people living currently in our single family homes all across the city. I think about my neighborhood. There are multiple generations living in a single family home. And with those people comes cars, no doubt. Nick, I would say, to answer that question, I would think that when we received the city council direction, perhaps that's what they were thinking about initially, to offer or to allow opportunity housing in our neighborhoods that are closer to transit, to give our residents more options for getting around, so they would have the option of not having to use a car, not having to own a second car if they were closer to a transit station, hub, or high quality transit. So I imagine that's why we initially got that council direction from our city council. I will also say that because of the crisis that we find ourselves in, and the fact that we are going to have to accommodate new housing units mandated by the state, that we are going to have to make some choices, and there are going to be some trade-offs. I think the city is in a conversation now about, particularly as we continue to urbanize, are we going to prioritize our people and housing our people, housing our residents, or are we going to continue to prioritize the automobile? Now, I know that's a very tough conversation. I understand, that cars are important for people to get around. I also understand, again, just like we're trying to offer a variety of housing options to our residents, it's important to have a number of different mobility options to residents as well. So I think the two go hand in hand. I think it's important to offer different housing options as well as offering different mobility options. They go hand in hand. And I think it's going to be important as our city continues to grow and to transform that and urbanize, that we're going to have to continue to look at trade-offs and continue to offer a variety of options.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Matt. The question is, a lot of advocates see this proposal as an opportunity to address equity issues. How do policies like the one adopted in Sacramento and being studied in San Jose address equity issues such as climate change and segregation?
You got me a big one there, Nick.
I can break that up for you if you like.
Yeah, that would probably take an hour and a half to get into details on that one. But no, essentially, I mean, I think it's really, we got to get serious about the challenges that we face as a city, as state, and a nation. I mean, you know, my job, I love my job. I get to plan out 20 years ahead, right? And see what do we need to be sustainable, to meet our climate goals. So we've committed to being carbon neutral by 2045, right? And our land use decisions are a huge part of that, right? And so understanding that, look, we got to get serious about having a city for all, right? And so our city is coming out with a racial equity framework. We're going to have very aggressive policies and programs to meet our racial equity goals. And we got to get serious about housing and the availability and affordability of housing. I mean, getting back to the parking thing, I joke with folks, but before we start complaining about, well, we're not going to have enough places to park. If everyone in our city went into their garage and took out their old Peloton they're not using and moved it into their living room, cleaned out the garages and moved to their driveways, you know, we could make some more room. But no, I mean, we got to be serious about our land use decisions, right? I mean, what is more important? I mean, is it you know, space for things like housing, or is it space for 3 boats and a car? So those kinds of things we need to have conversations about. But we not only have a state mandate through AB 686 to make sure that we have more affordable housing opportunities in our highest resource neighborhoods. It's just the right thing to do. You know, you can look at those maps, those redlining maps, racial cover maps, and you look at a demographic map and a racial composition map, and those, you know, it's very clear, right? Our most affluent communities are the whitest communities, and there's reasons for that, right? And so we've got to look for opportunities to provide smaller, lower cost, both affordable rental and homeownership. This strategy of allowing greater array of housing types or fourplex, you can do that as a homeownership opportunity as well. So, you know, but we also have another 49 policies and programs that we're looking at the very thing, but this is just one piece of the pie.
Okay, thank you. We've still got a few questions for our panelists before we go to the Q&A with our audience. These next 2 questions are for both Roberta and Kiyomi. So Roberta, you'll answer first and Kiyomi will answer second. And then when we do the second question, Kiyomi, you'll answer first and Roberta will answer second. I'll read the question to both of you so you don't have to remember. Roberta, here is the question. What are some of the takeaways from the Envision 2040 General Plan Task Force process when debating this issue? Oh, and you're muted, Roberta. There you go.
I think you should be more specific about the question, but my takeaways from it was that it was not balanced. If we really truly want more development, there were only, I think, 4 developers allowed on it. And they had very specific requirements to continue with building. So many developers have pulled out of San Jose. It's really sad. We're at less than 50% of the building goal because it does not pencil out for developers. And I mentioned the inclusionary housing fee of $175,000 per unit. That does not make it more affordable if you have to pay that to the city to build a unit. And it does not add units. And the second one is the commercial ratio that's required. They say it doesn't pencil out and they back out. So my takeaway is that there's not balance on the task force to really present what's needed to get more building. And I have to say, I agree with Matt and Kiyomi and Rosalind on the problem. Fully agree. And I actually agree on the outcome that's desired. What I want to say though is that things like the color of law are being misquoted. If you read the law referenced in the color of law, it wasn't single family zoning that kept people of color out. Very specifically, it was that Oakland and East Palo Alto were designated for Blacks and Blacks were not able to get loans. So if you go back to my slide about generational wealth, the reason that the white neighborhoods are most affluent is because they were allowed to buy a home. And opportunity housing does not increase home ownership opportunities. In fact, it will decrease them, because now first-time home buyers will be competing with investors who have more money and deeper pockets, and nonprofits who will get first right of refusal to buy by the city. So I've predicted long-term trends for a number of years for the biggest companies in the world. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that this is going to have the opposite effect of what's promised.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. Kiyomi, let me read the question for you again. The question is, what are some of the takeaways from the Envision 2040 General Plan Task Force process when debating this issue?
Yeah, so the meeting synopsis and the present and an actual meeting is recorded online and available to the public. So just to put that out there. But it did, the recommendation to study this citywide did pass 22 to 12. And the task force members in favor of citywide opportunity housing, these were the leaders from social and racial justice groups, affordable housing, smart growth, and the environment. And people dissenting were, other than of course Roberta, were developers, Silicon Valley organization, other council members that often receive support from those particular groups. So I want to just highlight a couple things the opposition brought up, people who didn't want citywide opportunity housing during that task force meeting, and one was environment and resources. And we've already discussed the environment piece, and we know how an investment in citywide opportunity housing is an investment in ridership and transit options. But I want to address the concern on adding a strain on existing resources. Because here's the question, is when you allow multiplex housing only in areas a half mile of transit and communities already accepting multifamily homes, how does it make sense that these are not the people in areas with the most strain on existing resources? And if we're really concerned about that, then we should be thinking about how we're going to better use the rest of that 94% of residential area. And so again, we know when the homes are, we also know that homes are overcrowded. So by allowing homeowners to reconfigure their existing property to better support those already at home, like adult children or aging parents, it doesn't add a strain on existing resources. It just creates healthier living arrangements. The other concern that people brought up was staff time. So they stated that citywide opportunity housing would take away attention and focus on other city priorities. Yet planning, and we have Rosalind on here today, they stated that it has more capacity than before, staff to focus on this, and financial resources, including a grant from California HCD, which is the same body that put out those AFFH guidelines. Whose implementation would actually support citywide opportunity housing. And the reason why you got the 22 that supported studying the citywide is because of the housing shortage. It was one tool in the toolbox. The housing needs are so great that we really need to move forward along with urban villages and ADUs. So this is not an either or situation. We don't have to pick between this and ADUs, it's together. And then it opens the doors to explore ways to prevent displacement, to look at creating opportunities for community ownership. The other, of course, is equity. We talked about the AFFH. We talked about the role of zoning, excluding people of color. And you can also look at the Othering and Belonging Institute if you want to learn more about exclusionary zoning. And then we also talked that, we also had a task force member mention that most of the already affordable denser housing stock is already near the transit corridors. So that we really need to look beyond this, and really with a commitment to guidelines and compatibility that this can be done successfully. And lastly, with the environment, right, VTA supported citywide because complaints about transit ridership and lack of transit is directly tied to land use and density, which equate to lower ridership. And so citywide opportunity housing captures both the widely accepted biking and walking distances from transit because cyclists are willing to bike more than a half a mile or a few blocks. So we really shouldn't be using our current transit system as a tool to continue systemic equities, rather view citywide opportunity housing as an investment in ridership, which provides resources to expand this. And really the biggest takeaway, I think, is when people have the correct facts and information, generally we see that people agree that it's beneficial to study this to determine what is best for San Jose so that we can make an informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiyomi. Okay, so we've got another question here for Kiyomi and Roberta. Kiyomi, you'll go first this time, and Roberta will go second. And just so everybody is aware, we've got this question, we've got one question for Matt, and we've got one question for everyone, and then we'll get to the audience participation question. So everybody just try to keep your answers a little on the shorter side. That way we can wrap up by 6:30 and give the audience some time to answer. So Kiyomi will go first with this question, and then Roberta. The question is, why do you feel there has been so much input around this issue?
Yeah, so I think there's input and then there's interest, right? So the citywide community engagement effort, I don't think would really begin until after the council decides whether or not to have staff study this or not study it. But I think what we're seeing is an indication that there's community interest in getting information so that they can provide the input, and we think that we should honor that by actually doing the study. Now, if you're asking why there's interest, I think it's because it hits home figuratively and literally for everybody in San Jose, right? And I think there's something I've heard, and it's this myth circulating that single-family neighborhoods deserve special protection because of an imaginary promise about its lasting in perpetuity. And I think that's really interesting because I think there's a reason that the general plan is regularly updated. We celebrate changes when we get more open space and less industrial, and it's very inconsistent to think about this, I think, as a promise. And, you know, there's so many real promises that are deserving of being realized, right? So one is the Fair Housing Act, right? We're still trying to pursue this by eliminating exclusionary policies that segregate and divide us. There's climate goals, right? A community-wide, Climate Smart San Jose is a community-wide initiative to reduce air pollution, save water, and improve quality of life. And we think citywide opportunity housing can really address those things. And so to me, all of these are the real promises that we as a city and as a country have pledged to uphold as integral to our values.
Okay, thank you, Kiyomi. Roberta, let me read back the question. The question is, why do you feel there's been so much input around this issue?
Bottom line, there's not enough housing. And as I mentioned before, their city has policies that block it. There are people who don't have housing that want it. And there are people who paid for their house and expect to get what they paid for, and they don't want to lose that. So there's something called quiet enjoyment in real estate, especially in the lease. And if you can picture the house you live in and then having 7 units built to your right, behind you, to the left, and in front of you, 7 units, 3 stories high, all around you, blocking your sunlight, blocking your quiet enjoyment, creating much more noise, people are upset. They paid to get in. And that's why I recommend having home buyer programs as opposed to funding nonprofits to build rentals. Because then what you do is you really start to create generational wealth across other areas.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. I think we are going to just skip the last 2 questions so that we can move to the audience Q&A. I know that we're getting close to 6:30. We've got about 18 minutes left. So let me jump to the Q&A. We'll start picking questions and panelists can start responding. Let's see. There are about 60 questions. So everyone, please, just so you know, we're not going to get to every question tonight. We're just going to pick some. If you have other questions or your question didn't get answered, feel free to reach out to us and we can try to get an answer for you after this panel. So there are a lot of questions. Let's pick some. This is one I feel like got brought up a couple times. Rosalind, maybe you can answer this one. What is the difference between being designated and being zoned?
Yes, great question. And I'm glad you asked that because I think there is some confusion about that as well. So let me start. So the city of San Jose is a charter city. Prior to a couple of years ago, because we were a charter city, we did not have to update our zoning ordinance to make it align or conform to our general plan. But our general plan and its land use designations is what governs what can get built in this city. Like I said, up until a couple of years ago, now there's a new state law that's requiring all cities throughout the state of California, regardless if you're a charter city or not, you must align your zoning with your general plan land use designation. So when we say land designated, it means it's designated in our general plan for residential uses. And so that first map that I showed, the light yellow, those are the general plan, residential, low density, single family land use designations. So that is the difference. That's a good question for us to clear up. And also I also want to make the difference between what's existing, our existing housing stock. Of course, it's quite different from our residential land use designations and our general plan, because that's talking about our residential uses from now to 2040. So of course, there's going to be a difference between what's existing and what our general plan allows.
Thank you, Rosalind. Let's see, I'm trying to pick a question that's not just going to go back to you again. We can ask a different panelist. Matt, maybe you can speak to this since Sacramento's been going through this process already. How do we involve the whole range of stakeholders in this conversation? It seems like a handful of single-family homeowners in particular neighborhoods have decided this is all about them. The residents of the city who might benefit from new opportunities seem to be being left out of the citywide policy discussion. And just to recap, the question was, how do we involve the whole range of stakeholders in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's over the course of years and many tiers, I'm sure. I mean, this strategy came out of our general plan outreach. We didn't come in with this strategy. We came in, what are the biggest issues facing the city over the next 20 years? And what are some potential solutions to address those? So over 2 years of input, reaching virtually every corner of the city, countless workshops and meetings and surveys. We did a scientific survey, scientifically valid survey to understand some of the key issues and key strategies that we were thinking about. The scientifically valid survey demonstrated that City of Sacramento residents supported this strategy. So there's been a lot of those conversations. And the council members have been having conversations in their communities for a very long time about this strategy and others, and they unanimously approved for us to move forward with it. And so now, we're going to continue to have those conversations. I come to neighborhood associations all the time, just like this, virtually, and have conversations. But we're going to be moving into the implementation phase, where we're going to develop those development standards and design standards and work closely to make sure it works for folks as we move forward.
Thank you, Matt. Roberta, I think I have a question that you might be able to answer. Let's see here. The question is, and there's a little after this, so I might even repeat the question. How does home ownership work in the duplex, triplex, quadplex, fourplex scenarios? If it's still just one homeowner per lot with 1 to 3 renters, that doesn't help democratize home ownership. Will these lots be allowed to be subdivided or condoized?
Thank you for asking that question. That's a really good question. Currently, home ownership's by parcel. So a duplex is owned by one owner, and then they can choose to let their family live in the other or rent it out. That's true of triplex and a fourplex. The thing is you can say, oh, well, we could create condos in the fourplex or in the triplex. It will not be financially feasible to do that. That will not happen. That's why I recommend smart growth, where they can actually build condos vertically and give people first-time entry home ownership to start generating wealth. So then they can move up into other properties. It's not going to happen. And again, I would pretty much guarantee it. It's just, I own a fourplex. I've considered it because I would double my money. I would actually make a lot of money and be able to do something else with my life, like retire. And it's just not feasible. It's not going to happen. And it might happen with the nonprofits because the government's giving the money and it doesn't have to pencil out, but that's going to be rare because the government's focused on building rentals, not home ownership opportunities.
Thank you, Roberta. Kiyomi, I think I found a question for you. There's a little bit of a preamble for this, so bear with me just a sec. This person writes, I am concerned that this push for density, euphemistically called opportunity housing, is a slippery slope that will result in mobile home parks in San Jose being closed. I understand that single-family homes are being targeted, but this is a slippery slope. The fact that density is being called opportunity housing is troublesome. Here's the question. How do we protect mobile home parks, the last bastion of affordable home ownership in our city?
Yeah, so I'm glad this question was asked. And, you know, I am here representing San Jose Neighborhoods for All, but I also work for the Law Foundation, and we've actually done a number of projects with mobile home parks to protect the tenants there, and to try to make sure that they remain as affordable housing areas. I think we find that to be incredibly important, and you can see our work also with the Winchester Ranch. So there's no doubt that you know, Law Foundation sees the incredible value of mobile homes and affordable housing. But I think what you're asking too is like, how does this work into opportunity housing? I don't really see them as being opposing items. What we're saying is that we want to be able to put multiplex housing, duplex, triplex, fourplex into single family areas that are exclusively for single family homes. That's not us trying to put duplex, triplex, and fourplexes as a replacement for mobile home parks. So this is one tool again in the toolbox for being able to achieve or address our housing shortage, both affordability and availability, not as a takeover for one affordable tool to take over another. So we don't see these as competing strategies.
Okay, thank you, Kiyomi. Rosalind, I think I might have found another question for you. I'm trying to at least get everybody to answer answer two. The question is, are San Jose's surrounding cities and towns also creating similar opportunity housing programs to allow them to build up their single family housing base? This includes Campbell, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Palo Alto, and Los Gatos.
Yeah, so to date, we have not heard of any other nearby cities who are considering a similar concept. I mentioned Berkeley, South San Francisco for sure. To my knowledge, and I might just not be in the know, but to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any other cities close by. You know, Matt, because he's been in this arena a little bit longer than the city of San Jose, he may be familiar with other cities closer to us who may be considering.
Okay, thank you. Bear with me, I'm trying to find one for Roberta here. I thought I saw one. Maybe you can speak to this, Roberta. Won't this dramatically increase residential property sale values in the short to midterm, possibly defeating the objective?
Actually, for the person who sells to a developer, that is in fact happening in San Francisco. Those who are selling to the investor developer are getting more than they would have if they sold to a first-time home buyer. And that's why I'm very concerned about first-time home buyers being blocked. That's why we are all concerned about that, because if you look at generational wealth and real equity, it comes from home ownership, not rentals.
Thank you, Roberta. Just had a call to take. Let's find another question. Sorry, guys, there's a few people asking repeat questions. I'm trying to find someone that we have not answered yet. Kiyomi, maybe you can speak to this one. Will opportunity housing construction be subject to prevailing wage requirements, and will it use union labor?
Yeah, I actually don't know that I'm the right person to respond to that. I would actually probably send that back to Rosalind, or maybe even Matt, what he's seen locally too.
Sure. Well, Kiyomi, let's go ahead and do that then, and then I can try to find one for you in the meantime. Rosalind, Matt, either of you, do you want me to repeat the question?
I would just say that we haven't gotten that policy direction from our city council at this point. It wasn't included in the item when they sent it to staff and the task force to consider. So it's not on the table at this point. I'll say that.
Okay, thank you. And Rosalind, I actually think I have another one for you. This has been asked a few times, so let me see. Why isn't this being put forth for a public vote?
Mm.
So again, when staff brings this work, the recommendation to City Council in October, it'll be for them to discuss, to deliberate, and to provide other direction. So, for example, we know that there is a lot of community interest in this work, and I previously mentioned that during the scope of the 4-year review task force, it did not include community engagement. We were to work with the task force members, and that's what we did. And so we've indicated that one of the first steps would be, if council gives us direction to move forward, would be to initiate that community engagement process. So given the interest, I'm just given, an idea that the council, in fact, before giving staff direction to further the work, they could say, let's spend some time doing more engagement. Let's talk to more people first. Let's hear more about the concerns and how those concerns might be addressed. So again, I want to make it very clear that there's no decision has been made on this policy concept, that we're taking the task force recommendation to City Council in October, and then we're going to get their direction. And I don't know what that might be. One thing I do know, that there is a lot of interest in the topic.
Thank you for that. Matt, I think I've got one for you. Maybe you can speak to this in your capacity. If a parcel is going to consume 2 or 3 times the energy as existing, while the new structures block solar access to neighboring structures, how will this pass CEQA review, which requires mitigation for negative renewable energy impacts? Is that something that you have experience with in Sacramento?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say generally, we obviously operate under CEQA, right? So if you have a project or a general plan amendment or any policy change, you look at that to see if there's any potential environmental impacts on the environment with that policy change. So, with our general plan, including this key strategy and policy and the program for us to move forward, it's going to be evaluated in our master environmental impact report. So it's going to include a full evaluation of the growth over the next 20 years and where that growth is going to be, including in residential neighborhoods. But only 8% of our residential growth is going to be within our neighborhoods. 92% of it's on commercial corridors, downtown, and opportunity areas. Right, we're talking about a small percentage of units. But yeah, and we have fees, sewer impact fees, and the like to take care of incremental needs there. But we're also moving to all electric, so we're going to do really good with our greenhouse gas emissions going forward.
Thank you, Matt. Let's squeeze in 2 questions. Rosalind, this is another one for you. It's been brought up in a couple different ways, so I'm just going to sum this up. Opponents have said that nonprofits are paid by the city to lobby for opportunity housing. Is that accurate?
I will say this, that again, our staff involvement in this work is per council direction. Obviously, we had many different members on the general plan 4-year review task force that represent all kinds of constituencies. Some private sector, some public sector. We had council members on the task force. So the task force, about 40 people representing all kinds of folks and sectors throughout the city of San Jose. That's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in real quickly, I just want to clarify this point too. So Law Foundation is not paid to advocate for citywide opportunity housing from the city. We're actually, we are given grants from the city, but it's for our direct services work. So we represent low income tenants and things like unlawful detainers and things like that. So it is not for advocacy.
Could I add to this, Nick? Because I've been involved with this for 6 years.
Go ahead, Roberta.
And I have a different perspective.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So they're not paid to advocate, but when the law's passed, they benefit. So it's important to see that symbiotic relationship. When they passed stricter rent control laws, that the Law Foundation was given money to protect renters at the expense of rental providers. And I know I'm a rental provider, so we can argue this all day long, but that's the bottom line.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. I think we have time for one quick question. I'm just trying to find one that we can get.
I have one on ADUs if you're interested. I have a question
What is the question?
and answer on ADUs. Well, the question is, why are so many ADUs getting permitted? Why the 50%? And I have a response to that from a real
Go for it.
estate perspective. Okay, so Rosalind mentioned that 50% of the ADUs are in the permit list or in the permit queue. And what's happening is people who are selling, who had illegal ADUs, are getting them permitted so they can sell for a higher price. I know I've helped my clients do that. So initially, this law is allowing people who've been doing things illegal to make them legal. And that's a very generic, objective response.
Thank you for that, Roberta. I've got one more question. Rosalind, I think this, if the council were to somehow decide not to have city staff study opportunity housing, could the council vote on a future policy if one was proposed without a study?
I'm not sure if I understand that question. Could you repeat that?
So I think what this person is asking is, if the council decided not to have staff study this issue of opportunity housing, could they bring it back at a later date without staff studying the issue?
Well, again, the city council has discretion to address policy, make policy changes. It is a discretionary action. We've gotten this direction thus far. And as we take the recommendation to city council staff, right, we provide our professional analysis to our decision makers so they can make a well-informed decision. And so with the task force work, staff has also included in terms of moving forward with an opportunity housing policy, is that there are a number of items that also need to be considered before such a program could be implemented, right? We've talked about a displacement risk analysis. That's very, very important. We've had a lot of conversation this evening about we don't want opportunity housing to have an unintended consequence. So we definitely want to look at displacement risk analysis. We know how important design standards and development standards are going to be if such a policy moves forward. We know that it's just going to be very important. If we're adding additional units on a single family lot, design standards, development standards are paramount. So our recommendation to our city council is that we do that future work. And then obviously an environmental analysis is going to have to be conducted because we're in the state of California and we have to abide by CEQA. So that's automatic. So that's the professional staff recommendation to our city council.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind, and to all of our panelists. I know that we did not get to everyone's questions tonight. There's about 67 of them sitting there right now. If you guys still have questions after this, which I most likely will, please send them to us. We can try to answer them. We can send them to the panelists. We as San Jose Spotlight can try to answer them to the best of our ability. So that wraps up our discussion, and I hope this webinar helped our viewers and readers understand opportunity housing proposal more clearly. Thanks again to our partner, Silicon Valley at Home, and tonight's sponsor, Housing Authority of Santa Clara County, and to our panelists for participating in this forum tonight. A video recording of this webinar will be available on the San Jose Spotlight website later this week. And to follow our coverage and learn how to support our nonprofit journalism and programming like this, please visit our website, San Jose Spotlight. I'm Nick Preciado, editor of San Jose Spotlight. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you again at a future event. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Nick. You did a great job. Nick. Thanks, panelists.
Thank you.